the 26th of June, 2025. Dawn over the Gulf of Oman fractured without warning. A U.S. Navy P-8 Poseidon cruised a familiar track above international waters when threat lights winked alive. Iranian surface-to-air missiles leapt from hidden sights, contrails carving the pastel sky. One warhead blossomed beside the patrol jet. Shrapnel scythed the tail. Hydraulics bled away, and the cabin filled with the acrid mix of burning insulation and fear. Alarms howled. The aircraft bucked and yawed as pilots fought to keep wings level. A young co-pilot, face pale and lip split, pushed through pain to read checklists, tapping the panel with bloody gloves. Stabilizers shuddered, altitude unwound, options narrowed. With the Gulf widening below, they committed to an emergency descent toward the UAE, coaxing the wounded Poseidon home on discipline, muscle memory, and a thread of failing hydraulics. The landing gear slammed down late, tires squealed, the jet lurched, then thumped to a halt in a storm of smoke and dust. Medics hauled the crew into morning heat, cutting flight suits, checking pulses, counting heads. All survived. Relief lasted a breath. The true damage wasn't only metal and flesh. Someone had chosen to fire. Somewhere far beyond the runway, a chain of decisions had turned radar tracks into a trigger pull. News raced to Washington. Within hours, the National Security Council gathered under cold lights, voices low, eyes hard. This was no miscalculation. It was a line crossed. The president's message was simple. Harm an American, challenge a nation. The response would be measured, unmistakable, and close. Out at sea, a deck crew refueled and rearmed, awaiting Eagle. Before sunrise, Tehran would hear afterburners and understand what consequence really means. The opening move was over. The reckoning had begun. In Tehran, officials celebrated quietly. State media hinted at a defensive action, framing the missile launch as protection of Iranian sovereignty. But inside the Pentagon, the assessment was stark. This was no accident. Intelligence feeds confirmed that the Bavar 373 surface-to-air system had tracked and fired deliberately. The signatures, the launch telemetry, the intercept path, everything pointed to intent. This was not a rogue operator. This was policy. The White House Situation Room filled with the president, senior advisors, military commanders, and intelligence chiefs. Screens flickered with maps of Iran, troop positions, missile sites, and intercepted communications. A still frame of the wounded American pilot was pinned in one corner, a silent reminder of the cost already paid. Suggestions came quickly. Cruise missile strikes from submarines in the Arabian Sea, long-range bombers from Diego Garcia, cyber intrusions into Iranian command systems. Each option had merit. Each carried risks. What finally emerged was something sharper, more surgical. Rather than unleash waves of bombers or fleets of Tomahawks, the Pentagon chose a scalpel. A single aircraft, a single pilot, a single strike. The target was selected with chilling clarity, the Ministry of Intelligence and Security headquarters in central Tehran. For years, that complex had orchestrated operations against U.S. forces, trained proxies, and funneled disinformation campaigns abroad. Taking it down would gut Iran's covert arm and send an unmistakable signal. No center of power is untouchable. And the weapon of choice? Not a relic of past wars, but America's newest blade, the F-15EX Eagle II. Unlike older variants, this jet carried nearly 30,000 pounds of ordnance, integrated seamlessly with drones and satellites, and bristled with electronic countermeasures. It could sprint at Mach 2, vanish low against terrain, and still deliver precision bombs into the heart of a guarded city. Across the Atlantic, on board the USS Gerald R. Ford, ground crews moved with mechanical precision. Two French-designed AASM Hammer precision-guided bombs were hoisted beneath the Eagle's wings. Their guidance kits fused American GPS with hardened anti-jamming tech, designed to slip past enemy defenses. In the ready room, a single pilot absorbed final orders. Maps of Tehran glowed on the wall, routes traced in red, threat rings overlapping like scars across the screen. He memorized altitudes, timings, radio codes. Failure meant capture or worse. Success meant rewriting the balance of power. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, Washington had made its decision. Retaliation would come not in waves, but in a blade-edge strike. Tehran had opened the contest. Now America would answer with one jet, one mission, and consequences that would echo far beyond Iran's borders. Night draped itself across the Arabian Sea, broken only by the glow of deck lights aboard the USS Gerald R. Ford. On its vast steel runway, sailors worked in orchestrated rhythm. Chains rattled, hydraulic lifts whined, and the metallic clang of tools echoed over the roar of the carrier's turbines. At the center of it all stood the jet chosen to carry America's answer. The F-15EX Eagle II. Technicians swarmed around it, securing pylons, running diagnostics, and linking the French-made AASM hammer bombs to encrypted American guidance systems. Each weapon was checked and rechecked, fuses armed, fins tested, GPS locked. Fuel lines hissed as the Eagle's tanks filled with enough JP-8 to carry it deep into hostile territory and back again. Inside the ready room, the pilot sat alone at a narrow table, helmet by his side, eyes fixed on a mission binder thick with satellite images. He rehearsed every waypoint, every altitude adjustment, every emergency contingency. He knew that radar towers would be waiting, that missiles could rise at any moment, that one mistake in judgment or timing could turn this mission into a fiery grave. Still, his expression was calm, sharpened by years of training. The briefing officer spoke in clipped tones. Objective: Tehran, Ministry of Intelligence. 2 hammer bombs. Precision strike. Flight profile: low altitude ingress, terrain masking, high speed egress. Rules of engagement: weapons free. The pilot nodded. No questions, no hesitation. On deck, the Eagle's twin General Electric engines roared to life, thunder rolling across the carrier. The canopy lowered, sealing the pilot inside his cockpit cocoon, HUD flickering green before his eyes. Final checks flashed across the screen. Navigation green, weapons hot, systems nominal. As the deck officer swung his arm forward, the Eagle surged down the catapult, fire streaking behind it. In seconds, the jet was airborne, banking eastward toward the faint glow of the horizon. Alone, unseen, it carried America's retribution within its steel frame. Every sailor on deck knew the weight of what had just left their ship. It wasn't merely a fighter jet disappearing into the night, it was a message, a strike destined for the heart of Tehran. And somewhere ahead, beneath dark skies and shifting terrain, a lone pilot braced for the most dangerous flight of his life. The Eagle II cut through the night sky at blistering speed, its twin engines pouring 58,000 pounds of thrust into the darkness. The Gulf slipped behind, and soon the jagged Iranian coastline loomed ahead. From here, the mission transformed. No longer was it a flight, it became survival. The pilot eased the throttle back and dropped altitude sharply. At less than 200 feet above ground, the fighter skimmed the terrain, hugging valleys and rivers, weaving between low ridges. Every second demanded precision. Telephone poles snapped past like spears in the dark. Power lines hung invisible until the last instant, forcing sudden jolts of the stick. Villages slid beneath him in a blur, startled shepherds and truck drivers catching only a fleeting roar before silence reclaimed the night. Flying this low was both shield and risk. Iranian radar systems, powerful on paper, were hampered by the curvature of the Earth. At 50 meters, the F-15EX was invisible until it crested terrain. But low flight also meant no margin for error. One lapse of focus, one wrong calculation, and the Eagle would smash into steel or stone before alarms could even sound. Minutes crawled. Sweat gathered under the pilot's helmet, dripping down his neck. The HUD glowed, altitude numbers twitching with every gust of wind. Radar warnings flickered ghost signals, faint sweeps of Iranian systems searching the skies. He stayed low, unpredictable, jinking left and right to confuse potential locks. Somewhere in the distance, launchers sat ready, their operators unaware that death was streaking toward their capital. At exactly 22 kilometers from Tehran, the terrain flattened. The pilot's breathing slowed. This was the moment of exposure, the point where stealth ended and audacity began. To strike his target, he needed altitude. Climbing meant becoming visible, a clear blip on every radar screen in the region. He pulled back on the stick, The Eagle responded instantly, nose rising, engines howling. The altimeter spun 1,000 meters, 2,000, 3,000, 500. G-forces pressed him deep into his seat as alarms shrieked in his headset. Radar lock detected. In operations centers across Iran, early warning radars snapped to attention. Controllers shouted orders. Launch crews scrambled. Concealed batteries stirred, their missiles thrusting upward with fire and smoke. Bright trails sliced into dawn's pale light, each one angling to end the American incursion before it reached the city. But this climb was no desperate gamble. It was precisely calculated. The Eagle sensors locked onto coordinates. The guidance systems of the hammer bombs confirmed target acquisition. At 5,000 meters, the release parameters flashed green across his HUD. He pressed the button. The jet shuddered as two bombs detached cleanly, tail motors igniting, their fins adjusting instantly to trajectory. They slipped into the darkness like predators unleashed, no time to watch. The pilot yanked the stick hard left, rolling the jet into a split S maneuver. The Eagle pitched inverted, then dove nose down, bleeding altitude in exchange for sheer speed. Missile trails curved above, struggling to follow. The cockpit shook violently as airspeed surged past 1,000 kilometers per hour, terrain rushing back up to meet him. Behind him, Iranian operators tried frantically to reacquire the target. Radars scrambled, missile seekers strained, anti-aircraft guns barked tracer fire into the dim horizon. But the Eagle had already vanished back into the folds of terrain, leaving only echoes of its roar. Above, the bombs continued their relentless path, small, fast, unpredictable. Iranian defenses fired in desperation, interceptor missiles detonating hundreds of meters away, fooled by the bomb's erratic guidance curves. Nothing stopped them, nothing would. The decisive moment had passed. The jet was alive, the bombs were free, and Tehran was seconds away from feeling the weight of America's reply. Dawn broke over Tehran as the first hammer bomb streaked across the sky. Iranian radar crews tracked faint signatures, but their screens lit too late. At 6:18 a.m., the weapon plunged into the roof of the Ministry of Intelligence headquarters. For a fraction of a second, silence hung, then the warhead detonated with bone-cracking force. The explosion tore through reinforced concrete and steel, ripping upward in a fiery plume. Shockwaves cascaded down the structure, shredding offices, splintering beams, and igniting servers stacked with years of classified data. Papers, electronics, and fragments of steel blasted outward in a storm of debris. 1 second later, the second bomb arrived. It struck 20 meters from the first impact, burrowing deep before its delayed fuse unleashed another inferno. This detonation compounded the first, collapsing load-bearing columns and triggering a deadly chain reaction. Floors pancaked, one atop the other, until the entire 5-story complex folded into itself in a rolling avalanche of dust and fire. Across the street, windows shattered in towers and shops, glass raining down on startled civilians. Sirens wailed almost instantly. Ambulances, fire crews, and security forces converging on a downtown block that moments before had symbolized secrecy and power. Now it was rubble. Amid the chaos, Iranian emergency teams clawed through smoke and twisted metal. But the reality was undeniable. Not only had a building been destroyed, but years of operational archives, encrypted systems, and covert networks had been erased in seconds. Critical servers melted, records vaporized, documents incinerated into ash now drifting above the Capitol. Above the wreckage, an American drone orbited silently. Its cameras streamed crystal-clear images back to the USS Gerald R. Ford and the Pentagon. Analysts leaned forward, watching secondary explosions bloom inside the ruins, likely ammunition stores, communication nodes, or backup power systems. The evidence was unmistakable. The target had been obliterated. In the White House Situation Room, silence reigned as the first high-resolution photos arrived. Advisors studied the collapsed heap where Iran's intelligence headquarters once stood. Then, slowly, nods of recognition passed around the table. The message had been delivered. For Tehran's leadership, the humiliation was immediate. their most guarded institution reduced to ash by a single American jet, their most protected capital penetrated with precision. No propaganda spin could erase the black column of smoke rising over the skyline. And for Washington, the response was complete. Deliberate, precise, devastating. A line had been crossed, and America had answered with a strike that reverberated louder than any speech or sanction could. As the dust settled over Tehran, the strike's meaning grew heavier than the rubble itself. America had not just destroyed a building, it had dismantled a symbol, erasing years of intelligence infrastructure in less than a minute. The message was crystal clear. Harm a U.S. service member, and retaliation will come swiftly, decisively, and in ways no fortress can withstand. Yet beyond the fire and twisted steel, the lesson resonated deeper. Technology had played its part: precision-guided bombs, stealth tactics, advanced radar evasion. But in the end, it was one human being at the controls, one pilot whose discipline and training transformed machines into an instrument of strategy. Without courage in the cockpit, no amount of engineering could have carried this mission through. For Iran, the consequences were not only physical but psychological. Leaders who once believed themselves untouchable now understood vulnerability. For allies and adversaries alike, the strike underscored that America's reach is vast, its resolve unshaken, and its capacity to project power undeniable. And for ordinary people watching from afar, the moral echoed loud: provoke conflict recklessly, and the price may exceed imagination. Peace, fragile though it is, remains worth guarding, because when war comes, it consumes not only buildings and borders, but generations. Back aboard the USS Gerald R. Ford, the F-15EX touched down, scarred by heat and dust, yet intact. Ground crews saluted as the pilot climbed down, his expression steady, carrying the quiet knowledge that he had altered the course of history. One jet, one mission, one message etched permanently into the global order. So, what do you think? Was this strike the decisive lesson Tehran needed, or the spark of an even greater storm? Type 1 if you believe it forced Iran to reconsider, or 9 if you think retaliation still looms. Don't forget to like this video, share it with others who follow global security, and subscribe for more gripping stories of courage, conflict, and consequence. Until next time, stay vigilant, because history is written by those willing to act when the world holds its breath.